Action!
And away we go.
Come on, little Toyota.
Hey!
Look, I've got an SUV.
Well, it is massive, isn't it? You can barely fit in that parking space.
Everyone is looking at me thinking, what a wonderful man I am. Big luxury SUVs are very nice, but a lot of people can't afford them.
Is there still some luxury to be found at the bottom end of the new car market? Or do you really need to spend a fortune to own a good car?
In this video, we're taking three of the cheapest new cars you can buy from one of the most expensive places in the UK to one of the most affordable.
We're going to be finding out what these cars are really like to live with, compare them in all the important areas, and then at the end, we're going to crunch the numbers and name the best value car that you can buy right now. But before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to the channel for lots more road trips like this one.
So Will, where are we going and what are we doing?
Well, Doug, before I tell you that, I've got a question for you. What do you think the average price paid for a new car was in 2023?
Was it £1 million?
Nearly. It was just over £37,000, which is obviously an awful lot of money for anyone.
That really is. I mean, imagine what you could have bought with that, I don't know, 10 years ago. You probably could have got a really nice BMW 3 Series, maybe a 5 Series.
You could. Well, today that will get you a mid-spec Honda Civic. But we're going to be finding out if you really need to spend that much money to get yourself a good car. So we've rounded up three of the cheapest models that you can buy in the UK right now.
And where are we driving them?
Well, it isn't just the price of cars that has gone through the roof in recent years. The price of everything has really, including houses actually. But there is a place in England where the average price of a house is apparently less than twice the price paid for the average new car. So we're going to be driving to a place called Shildon in County Durham, where according to property website Zoopla, the median average price of a house is just over £69,000. We're going to be going there mostly on the motorway, and then we're going to be having an overnight stop on the Yorkshire coast in Whitby before tomorrow driving back through the North York Moors on some more challenging roads to find out what these cars are really like to live with.
Sounds interesting. But first, let's get a coffee and find out more about what we're driving. So what are we actually driving on this trip? Will, you've got a Toyota Aygo X?
It's actually an Aygo Cross. I can see why you're confused because on the Yaris Cross, they've spelt out Cross. Here it's an X, but I'm reliably informed by Toyota this is an Aygo Cross, and that's because it's an SUV. As you can see, it's got some black plastic wheel arches there.
Well, it is massive, isn't it? You can barely fit in that parking space.
And it's very cheap. So it's the cheapest car that Toyota makes, smallest car as well. Starts at just over £16,000. This is a slightly higher trim level, so it's a bit more expensive than that, but some of the things you get, really, if you're budget focused, you don't really need, like keyless entry. And although even in its cheapest form, this is a little bit more expensive than those cars, I reckon this could be a pretty good investment in the long term because obviously Toyota, legendary reputation for reliability, fuel economy very good, and it should hold its value quite well too.
Well, that might be the cheapest Toyota you can buy. This isn't the cheapest Citroen, but I'm not going to do this trip in an Ami. So instead, this is the C3 Origin. It starts at just under £14,000, so it's very cheap by new car standards. There is a new C3 coming towards the end of this year, but this C3 Origin is going to be on sale until that point. And it's very, very popular. It accounts for more than 30% of Citroen sales across the whole of Europe. In this car's lifetime, across all of its different various generations, they've sold more than 5 million of these. So lots of people have bought them. It's cheaper than your Aygo, and it's also bigger. But I do think, Dan, you're probably feeling the most confident of us three.
I'm feeling very confident because, yeah, when you think of value cars, most people will think of the Dacia Sandero. So in its entry-level essential trim, it will cost just $13,795, which makes it the cheapest car that you can buy in the UK at the minute. This one isn't that. This is a top-spec expression trim. So it gets a few extra niceties. So it's got an infotainment system, rear-view camera, and some nice fabric dashboard and stuff like that. And as we know, the Sandero is just a very comfortable, spacious thing, and I'm feeling quite smug.
But is it actually going to be the best car on this test? Let's find out. When we stopped for lunch in the Midlands, we decided to take a closer look at what some of the cheapest car interiors in the UK were really like. So welcome to the interior of the Citroen C3 Origin. You because there's an exclamation mark at the end of U, so it's important that you signify that in how you pronounce it. There's Plus and Max as well, but we're in a U model, and it's one of the cheapest cars that you can buy in the UK. And I think, for the money, there are lots of things about this interior which are actually pretty decent. First, let me point out some differences between this, the very cheapest model, and the higher ones that you spend more money on. Really, the only thing you'll notice a difference is this bit on the dashboard here is a different colour on the high trims. The seats are a different colour as well, but the main difference really is down here, because you can see this is some poxy little 5-inch black and white screen, but on the higher trim levels you get a bigger screen which runs Apple CarPlay and Android Auto. You don't get that on this. However, while this is very small and it's black and white, I do actually think this is still pretty fine, because it's rapid in its responses.
It is quick to respond, to be honest. It does look a bit like a Game Boy.
I mean, that is quicker than lots, in fact, maybe most other infotainment systems.
But calculators have always been quite quick as well. That's because they have nothing to do other than just...
That is true, but the simpler things are, the better it can be.
How do you find out where you're going?
Well, you can just use your phone for that. In fact, the only thing that is missing from this interior really is a phone holder up here. That would be good, because then you can just run Waze and...
So there's no Apple CarPlay?
There's no Apple CarPlay. The other thing that's good in here, I think, is the fact that you've got these physical controls for the air conditioning. So if it's really cold outside and you want to get warm quickly, very simply, all you have to do is that. Although admittedly they don't feel particularly
They are a little bit cheap. There are a couple of other bits in here as well, like this stuff up here that feels a little bit questionable, but you know, it is
generally,
a cheap car.
Again, in the context of how much this costs relative to other things, the quality in here is all right. You've got some nice sort of fabric and design generally in here is fairly appealing. And Will, touch that knob.
That actually feels...
Dan, touch it.
Oh, that's actually quite
It's
nice.
actually really good quality, isn't it? It's sort of the volume knob you'd expect on like a high-end Japanese audio system or
Bentley.
something. So, other things about this interior, the driving position. The thing that's good is the fact you can adjust the steering wheel for reach and for height, and pretty much anywhere you want to have it, you can see all of the driver display, which is very good. Again, not something you can say about lots of other cars. Also, physical buttons on the steering wheel here. The seats themselves, though, aren't particularly great. So they're very, very soft, but not in a good way, because there's no lumbar adjustment or support at all.
I was going to say lower back support's not great, is it?
And
Quite spongy.
the side support doesn't really exist either. So it means on a long motorway journey like this, even though the seats are very soft, they're not actually that comfortable. So it's not been great in that respect. But otherwise, generally, considering the money, this car, I think, is fairly impressive up front. Let's see what it's like in the back. Now, obviously, if you buy one of these cars and intend to carry 3 adults in the back every day, you're a lunatic. So this is an extreme test. But still, with 3 people in the back, what's it like?
It's not terrible, is it?
I wouldn't want to be here for ages.
No.
A bit tight.
But we can fit.
We can fit. I'm a bit squeezed on the shoulder room. If I do lean back and try to use the headrest, because the roof cuts in at the outer here, my head hits that.
I'm suffering here.
But you're quite a bit shorter, aren't you? So you're probably you're probably okay.
Yeah. You have manual rear windows as well, which is a bit of a throwback.
You do?
I think you're going to be more comfortable if it's just you 2 in the back. So let me get out for a second and try that.
Oh, that's better.
That is much better. I can actually use the headrest now.
Yes.
My shins are hitting the seat in front, but I probably could ask that person in front if there was someone sitting there to move their seat forward a bit. So overall, not too bad.
I definitely think you're going to be more comfortable here than in the back of the next car.
Let's have a look.
Right, now this is so bad that it's actually illegal, because the Aygo X Cross only has 2 seats in the back. So I'm going to get out and let you 2 describe how practical or otherwise.
Yes, so this is a 4-seater, only 2 seats in the back, no middle headrest, only 2 seat belts as well. But even for 2 people, 2 adults at least in the back, it's pretty tight, isn't it?
It's, especially for an SUV, it is very tight.
It's a good point. It is an SUV, so yeah, not particularly great. My knees wedged up against the seat in front here. The driver's seat, just as it was in the Citroen, set up for Doug's driving position. Headroom as well, not great really. And these tiny windows here, they do open, but only by that much. They're not really going to help at all. So generally, you do feel a little bit claustrophobic back here, but There are some better things in the front I want to show you, so let's take a look at those. Okay, so we're in the front. First thing, I just need to shift the seat back a bit because the driving position is quite far forward.
That was a huge difference that you made just then.
But on the subject of driving position, I think on the whole, it's a bit mixed. So the steering wheel, it moves up and down, as you can see, but it doesn't move in and out. Now, weirdly for me, it's absolutely fine, but it won't suit everyone.
That's terrible, isn't it?
It's not great.
This is more expensive than the other two cars.
But it's fine for me, and that's all that matters.
Of course.
But the seats are definitely more supportive, so I've got more lower back support. There's no adjustable lumbar support, but generally speaking, they are more supportive than those in the Citroen. And the interior as well, I would say that it does have the edge on the Citroen. Personally, it's all obviously hard plastic up here on the dashboard. You've got some piano black gloss trim there. But I think in terms of build quality, would you say it just has the edge over the Citroen?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
And you've got some genuine leather on the steering wheel there. That feels quite nice. Of course, this is a range-topping exclusive model, but even on the cheaper trims, the interior looks pretty much the same. It still gets this piano black. And the main difference, if you go for the entry-level pure trim, then you get manual air conditioning rather than this automatic setup. That comes on Edge and this exclusive model.
It looks like you've got a big infotainment system in the middle there.
I do. I have a proper infotainment system. Now this is a 9-inch screen, but really this is absolutely fine. Obviously it's colour.
But use that screen. Show me how quick it is.
It sometimes is a little
That's
bit
rubbish,
slow.
look at that!
It is a bit laggy.
That is like, that's less than half the speed of my little black and white thing.
That is true, but it does have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto.
That's true.
It's a bit higher up, and yeah, you can actually see where you're going without putting a phone holder on the side of the air vent. So on the whole, I would say that this interior is pretty good.
Sandero?
Let's do it.
Okay, so obviously the Sandero was the front runner at the start of this test. Does it have the best interior?
I think for driving position, it does. So there's a bit more lumbar support than you get in the C3.
These seats do feel more comfortable.
Also, I have height and reach adjustment.
That beats the Toyota.
It does beat the Toyota.
Not on the entry-level trim though.
No,
That's not very good.
that is true.
But while I remember it, in the C3, the steering wheel is actually offset slightly to the left. So this is definitely better than that in that
It
regard.
is, definitely.
Another great thing about the driving position here is the armrest as well, right? Because you don't get that
It's
at all in
the
the
only
other
one to
cars.
have one of those, yes.
This is also the only car that gets a little hook down here
For a bag.
for a bag, a handbag. Or no, isn't it a takeaway hook? Isn't that where you put your smelly curry bag or something?
Everywhere else, interior quality, I think is a bit of a mixed bag personally. So there is scratchy stuff, but because this is a top spec expression, you get some nice fabric on the dashboard.
Is it just a hard plasticky thing if you don't have a top
It
spec?
is, yes. And you also get this soft feel steering wheel,
Oh.
which isn't quite genuine leather like in the Aygo, but
Okay.
I also get an infotainment system.
You
So this is
do.
an 8-inch touchscreen. It's very simple. It's mainly there just for Apple CarPlay and Android Auto.
How quick is it?
It's quite quick. So if we hit the button,
That is
it is.
It's
pretty
way
quick.
quicker
It
than the
is.
Toyota.
And it's quite high up as well.
It is.
Yeah.
You've also got a lovely phone holder, which I know you mentioned.
And the
Very
USB
helpful.
socket that's right up on top of the
That
dash.
does really annoy me.
Does it get
because-
tangled up with the store, the indicator?
It does, and also it hangs down near your gear stick as well. So that isn't best place
That
in
is
my
annoying.
opinion. The rest of it, so these don't feel as nice as they do in the Aygo.
No, they definitely don't. I think the C3's actually got nicer dials than that.
Probably true, but what overall interior quality, what do you reckon is best?
I think Aygo gets it for that.
It's probably the Toyota, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, none of them have particularly plush interiors, let's be honest, but I think in terms of build quality, the Aygo just has the edge.
So it's the best driving position. Is it also the best in the back?
So I would say this is way bigger than the other two.
Agreed.
It's a lot more comfortable, even with 3 of us in the back here.
Much, much better.
There's lots of headroom, even for you, Will, who
Yeah,
are the
look.
tallest here.
Even if I sit properly upright and stretch out, then my head isn't touching the ceiling. Got loads of space in front of my knees there. Good sized windows as well.
There's also quite a lot of space for your feet under the seat in front of you as well.
And an electric window switch.
Electric windows, but only on the top trim.
Only on the top
You
trim.
don't get that on the entry-level trim.
But still, I would say this has got to be by
Definitely.
far and away the best in the back.
Pretty comfortable victory back here.
Yep.
Let's get back on the road. Will, hello.
Hello, how are you getting on, Doug?
You know what? I'm fairly pleasantly surprised so far. Obviously, this is one of the cheapest cars you can buy. My expectations for the trip were fairly low, especially considering we'd be on the motorway for most of this. But so far, it's certainly not uncomfortable. This interior is very usable and fine. It's quite noisy in here, but apart from that, I don't really have many complaints. What about you?
Well, this is an extremely fast car. I've got to be very careful with my right foot. But no, apart from struggling to overtake other cars that are doing 55 miles an hour, I'm doing just over 64 mpg, which given this is, motorway cruising speeds, I'd say that's very impressive. And yeah, okay, it's fairly noisy. At the moment, I'm doing 70 miles an hour and the engine's revving away at nearly 4,000 RPM. You might be able to hear that drone in the background. There's quite a lot of road and wind noise as well. But these are cheap cars, and I think, considering that, I'm quite impressed.
Pleasantly surprised so far.
But I wonder how Mr. Daniel Jones is getting on in the Sandero.
Well, he's probably feeling even more positive than we are. Let's find out in Shildon. So we made it for sunset in Shildon. And Dan, you were all right in the Sandero?
Yes, it's lived up to its reputation of being a very comfortable thing.
Okay. What is the best thing about it so far?
I like that it is the most powerful here, so it's very easy to get up to speed.
Okay, it's a powerful beast, isn't it?
It is.
What's the worst thing about it?
Definitely the wind noise. It's very noisy in there.
Okay. And Will, what about the Aygo X Cross X?
Well, I would say if the trip computer is to be believed,
Yeah.
which we're not sure about, we'll work that out later on, probably tomorrow, then fuel economy would be the best thing.
Okay.
Worst thing, it's pretty gutless, to be honest. It's not a turbocharged engine. It does need revving quite hard. You get on a hill on the motorway, especially when you're in fifth gear, it takes a while to get up to speed.
Dan's going to beat you in a drag race, isn't he?
He definitely is.
I think in the C3, maybe the worst thing is there isn't any lumbar support, not much side support. So after a long journey like this, that hasn't been particularly comfortable. But maybe the best thing is the high-speed ride on the motorway. So even though the seats aren't particularly good and the ride isn't brilliantly controlled at low speeds, it's actually okay on the motorway. And really, I guess we would have all preferred to do this in Bentleys or Rolls Royces or something like that, but all three have got us here perfectly fine.
Yeah, I've still got half a tank, so should we get to Whitby and have some fish and chips?
Let's go. Day two, before we leave Whitby, we're going to do a test of the boots that we have here. So the Sandero is surely the best. Dan?
So it is. It's got 328 litres of space.
Okay. How many suitcases can it fit in?
Let's find out.
Right. Is the parcel shelf going to...
Should do. It's
Yes,
four.
that's down.
Great. Right.
Bad
How
soil,
many?
is it?
Six.
Six. That's
Aygo?
pretty good. Yeah, not sure that's going to do quite as many.
So, Will, we've only got 8 suitcases.
I don't think we're going to need all of those.
But it's an SUV.
It is an SUV, but it's one with a very small boot. I'm not even sure you'd call this a boot lid. It's basically a piece of glass that opens up. And then, as you can see, there's not much space in there at all. 231 litres. So, thank you very much. I reckon if we get 4 in there, I will be quite impressed.
Well, 3 looks all right. Although, does that count as being below the parcel shelf or tonneau cover?
Look, 4. But
Well,
no, won't close.
Okay.
So, 4 is out of the question.
Okay.
Can we get 3 in here, do you think? 1, 2,
And then that, like
and
this.
then, yes,
That looks...
3.
So comfortably 3. Okay.
That's very impressive.
That's pretty terrible, I'd say.
It's a small car. It's a small car.
Probably the worst boot in any SUV.
It probably is.
Right, but what about the C3?
Let's have a look.
So we've got 6 in the Sandero, 3 in the mighty SUV. How many do you think we'll get?
Well, the C3 has a boot capacity of 300 litres, so a bit less than the Sandero. You can also see pretty big loading lip here, fairly narrow aperture, but the space inside looks actually pretty good. So, 1, 2, 3, and remember it's got to be below the parcel shelf. Oh, that's pretty close. at the front.
And there we go. That might
Right,
just...
4, easy. Go on, Dan.
Will it close? Will it
5.
close?
5 it is. Right, now let's go and find some actual nice roads to drive these on.
Let's do it. Right, we have finally made it to some nice roads. We're on the North York Moors at the moment. And you know what? This might be cheap, but it's pretty good to drive. It's not a hot hatch, of course, but it's fairly agile. Short wheelbase helps there, so it turns in quite nicely. Body control is good as well. And the steering, although it's quite slow, it's direct. You get a reasonable sense of connection with the front wheels. So on these tight roads, it is coping with them well. The only thing that's a little bit disappointing is, as I mentioned yesterday, the engine is quite gutless. You need to work it hard. And that would be fine if it were a nice sounding 4-cylinder engine, but it's not, it's a 3-cylinder. So it sounds pretty coarse. It's not particularly pleasant to rev out. But on the whole, I would say, given the price, this is pretty good.
The Sandero is built for comfort, so it doesn't have the sportier edge the Aygo Cross does on roads like these. The thing is, the handling's absolutely fine for the everyday. There's enough weight in the steering. I also have the TCE 90 engine, which gives me a turbocharger and 90 brake horsepower, making this the most powerful and the quickest car here.
Now, the C3 is slower than the Sandero, but it's not as slow as the Aygo X. It also doesn't have a turbocharger, so you do end up inevitably thrashing this thing to get anywhere, but you can still get up to motorway speeds. You can still overtake things, as long as they're not going particularly quickly. But what is it like to drive on these open roads that we have here? Well, to be honest, the C3 has a really soft and wallowy setup, and this steering is incredibly light. The body control is very, very loose in this car. So if you go round a corner quickly, it's very difficult to accurately place the nose. And it all just feels like a bit of a blob. So I suspect it is probably the worst to drive of the 3 cars that we have here. Will, you should have done some off-roading on the moors in your SUV.
Well, I could take a more direct route back to London because I'm in an SUV, so I could go anywhere across those moors.
You do, though, have the most pathetic looking tyres that I've ever seen on an SUV.
That is why it's delivering such good fuel economy, but according to the trip computer, I have 8 miles of remaining range.
Hang on, 8 miles? I thought we didn't have any electric cars on this test.
We don't, but we have a car with a very small fuel tank. So I found a petrol station pretty close by, programmed that in the sat-nav. So if we head there, after you've filled my car up for me, how do you fancy swapping and then finding out what each other's are like?
That does sound like a good idea. Wouldn't you, though, rather have slightly worse fuel economy but a much bigger fuel tank so you hardly had to stop?
No, because I'm in an SUV, so everyone is looking at me thinking, what a wonderful man I am because I'm driving around in an SUV, whereas you're just in a normal small car.
That is a good point. I didn't think about that. Okay, right, we'll get fuel and then swap.
Okay, I'll see you in a bit. Okay, so done a couple of miles in the C3 now, and first impressions are gear shift is a little bit mushy, definitely not as slick, as defined as it is in the Aygo Cross. And I don't get on with the driving position as well either, because the floor is quite high relative to the seat, so I almost feel like my knees are being tucked up. The engine definitely pulls a bit better from low revs, don't need to work it quite as hard, it's a little bit smoother as well. It is a 3-cylinder engine like the one in the Aygo, but it just sounds a little bit more pleasant.
Will's definitely right. After jumping out of the Sandero, the Aygo does feel very sluggish. It does feel sporty around these corners though, and the steering is weighted much nicer. It does come at the cost of ride comfort. It's a lot busier in here than the Sandero, and therefore not as comfortable.
So the driving position is definitely much better in the Sandero, and it doesn't take very long to notice that the ride is better as well. It's smoother, it's more calming than the C3. It is a bit louder in here though.
So I'm in the C3 now, and Doug's definitely drawn the short straw for the first half of this journey. This is the cheapest car here, and it does feel like it, especially the steering wheel, which compared to the others, especially the leather in the Aygo, just isn't as nice. The infotainment as well, it's a real drawback not having a proper infotainment system, and I'm having to follow everyone because I have no idea where I'm going. And the Sandero's phone cradle, which isn't really needed, the Sandero would pay dividends in here.
In the Aygo X-Cross, you can straight away feel that the steering is so much more alert and responsive than the other two cars. And the ride, it really doesn't take long to feel that it's much better controlled than the other cars as well, certainly compared to the C3. The driving position also seems pretty good, but it's a shame that you've got this hard, scratchy plastic here for your elbow, which isn't very comfortable, and there's no armrest. But you've got a nice big screen, so even though it's lower than in the Sandero, it is pretty big and easy to see everything. And generally, the ride, the handling is noticeably better. On the other hand, the acceleration in this car is truly and utterly gutless.
Okay, so the Sandero, the last of these cars, and I'm pretty impressed really, only done a few miles so far, but it is so much stronger at low revs. It's the only one of these cars that has a turbocharger, and that just makes it effortless to get up to speed by comparison. Now, of course, it's not that fast in the grand scheme of things, but it just means you can cruise along with fast-moving traffic. I'm the outside lane of a dual carriageway at the moment, and I feel quite at home here, whereas in the others, you've got to always be changing down and revving the car harder.
So we're making great progress on the way back now. All of us have driven all of these cars, and really the general consensus appears to be that it's going to come down to the Toyota and the Dacia. Is that right?
I think you're probably right, yes. I think in some respects this is actually the best car. Clearly not practicality though.
It's an SUV.
It is an SUV, it's a very small one. But so important are the numbers in this test that I think we've got to crunch the numbers before we can draw any conclusions. The only thing I would say is that the Citroen is going to have to be extremely cheap to make up for some of its shortfalls.
Yes, okay. So let's get back, crunch the numbers, and that's when we can pick a winner.
Let's do it.
So first, how much did that journey cost us in each of the three cars that we had here? Well, we ended up doing about 620 miles in total, and in the C3 I needed 60.37 litres of petrol, which on the day cost me £87.79, and I averaged 47.2 miles per gallon. What about the Sandero?
So I needed 57.82 litres, and that cost me £84.03, and I averaged 48 mpg.
Interesting. Well, SUVs aren't normally known for their fuel economy, but the Aygo Cross was actually easily the most efficient of these three. So I needed 53.7 litres, which cost me on the day £78.04, and that worked out to what I think is a very respectable 52.4 miles to gallon, particularly when you consider how much motorway driving we were doing.
But now arguably for the most important bit, which is how much they actually cost to own and to run. So we'll start with the headline prices, where the Citroen C3 is the cheapest. £13,995, beats the Sandero that we had on this test, beats the Aygo Cross. However, you can get a cheaper version of the Sandero. You can't though get a cheaper version of the Aygo Cross that will eventually beat the C3 in terms of price.
Cool.
And what we've done is we've calculated the total cost of ownership over 3 years. So Will, what have we factored into those calculations?
So that includes the price that you'll pay if you're paying in one lump sum at the beginning. On some of these cars that will include a discount if you either haggle with the dealer or you buy through our new car deal service. There is also insurance, servicing and maintenance, fuel economy, we've already mentioned that. And then there are a couple of other smaller bills as well, including the ED tax.
Okay, and our research shows that with everything factored in, even though the C3 has the cheapest list price, it's actually the most expensive to own over 3 years. And that's partly down to things like having more expensive insurance, servicing costs being higher as well. And also the problem is that it's the entry-level U version of the C3, and you get hardly any kit for your money as well. So you don't get automatic headlights, there's no rain sensing wipers, no rear parking sensors or reversing camera, and you get that black and white infotainment screen as well.
Okay, but you are talking about a cash buy there. So if someone
True.
were to walk into a dealership and pay the whole lot in one go, £14,000, and that probably isn't that likely. People are more likely at this end of the market to be signing up to a PCP finance agreement. So is the C3 more competitive there?
No, it's not. And that is partly down to the fact that Citroen offers a shocking interest rate of 11.9%.
Ouch.
There's no deposit contribution either, so you're going to have to pay £250 a month for the pleasure of driving your entry-level C3 over 3 years. But then at that point, it's only a tenner more each month to go for a mid-spec plus version of the C3, which gets you a lot more kit. And the reason they're so close on price is because that mid-spec version doesn't get the same horrific interest rate as the entry-level car. But the thing to point out is that even if you go for a mid-spec C3, it's still not a particularly good car.
So on the same terms, the Sandero is actually cheaper per month. It will cost you £221. And weirdly, that is regardless of whether you go for the entry-level trim or the Expression that we had. Dacia offer a manufacturer deposit contribution of £500 on the Expression trim, which makes it a bit of a no-brainer, really, doesn't it? You get all that extra kit, you get the infotainment system, you've got automatic lights, a rear camera, and you've also got rear parking sensors as well.
So if you're buying on a PCP finance, you just wouldn't go for that entry-level model.
Definitely. There is a new Sandero trim coming soon called Journey, which will sit at the top of the range, which will give you 16-inch alloy wheels and also built-in nav and a couple of other nice bits, but Expression's all you need. And then even if you did walk in with your credit card and pay on cash for the Sandero, still cheaper than the C3. Because if you were to buy it on our new car deals service, you get a discount of £244. It's also cheaper to service and cheaper to insure.
But again, the Aygo Cross is the cheapest in the long run for cash buyers based on our calculations. So it does cost the most to begin with. We have priced this up as an Edge model. That's the mid trim. The version we had on this test isn't a perfect representation of a model that you can buy right now, but based on Edge, you can get a £1,215 discount on that if you haggle, or if you buy through our new car deal service, as you mentioned. And it is predicted to depreciate more slowly than the other two cars. As we've already said, it's also quite a bit more economical, so it will, in the long run, cost you quite a bit less than the others. And actually, those lower fuel bills will still help if you're taking out a PCP finance deal. So the Aygo is more expensive than the others on a PCP deal. If you go for the Edge trim, then you'll be paying £268 a month based on the same terms as the other two cars. And even if you go for the Pure model, which is the entry-level trim, then you'll be paying £239 a month. So on that basis, it is slightly cheaper than the Citroen. And actually, the Pure still comes with a reasonable amount of equipment. So you get the rear view camera and adaptive cruise control, for example. Although you do miss out on rain sensing wipers, front fog lights, and the bi-tone paint. So you get a pure colour and it just looks a little bit more budget.
Okay, so really it feels like, particularly factoring in the finance here, that the C3 is a pretty distant third in this test. Not only is it more expensive, but it's the worst on the road, it's got the worst interior as well. Whereas the Aygo Cross looks surprisingly good value. Over 3 years it works out to be actually cheaper than the Sandero, and on a monthly finance deal it's only a little bit more money. So does it beat the Sandero here?
It's a tough one, I think, because both of those are genuinely good cars at the budget end of the small car class. Clearly there are better cars in the wider world if you've got more money to spend. But the Aygo X Cross, I think we are all agreed that it's sharper to drive. It offers cheaper running costs, as I've already mentioned, and it also comes with quite a bit more standard safety equipment.
Yes, it does depend very much on our priorities though. So obviously Sandero is bigger than the Aygo Cross SUV. It's also strong performance and you do pay less on PCP per month.
I think we are probably all agreed though that the Aygo Cross is the best small car here. Yeah, it's not the most practical car in the world. It has quite limited rear space and a small boot, but our research tells us that practicality isn't hugely important to small car buyers. And while the price of the Edge model is quite a bit above that of the Sandero, then as I've said, it does work out cheaper in the long run. And even if you're buying on finance, then the difference isn't actually that big.
Plus you get Toyota's reputation for reliability and their very generous 10-year warranty as long as you get it serviced regularly with Toyota. It's also worth mentioning that the Sandero might have walked this back when it first came out because it was a lot cheaper than, I think it started about £8 grand, but it has gone up quite a bit since.
Okay, so you can buy a good car at the budget end of the market, and the Toyota Aygo Cross is the best of the lot. Thanks very much for watching this video. If you want to see another one, then click up there. Make sure you subscribe to our channel to see all of our reviews as soon as they go live, and to find out more about this test and everything else we do, and to get a great deal on your next car, click on that link to go to whatcar.com.